Hello everyone, Moobies here, and welcome to the Trial of the Grand Crusader Boss Guide series. In this video, we'll be going over the first boss in the arena, the Beast of Northrend on Heroic. If you're looking for a normal mode guide, please fast forward to the end of this video for normal mode tips. The Beast of Northrend is the first encounter you'll face in the Trial of the Grand Crusader. It is a 3-phase fight with multiple boss mobs, adds, and mechanics. Each phase has its own distinct boss that you'll need to kill before moving on to the next phase. Each of the phases are also on a timer. On Heroic, the timer is very strict, giving you a window of opportunity to kill each boss in. Once a boss is killed, it will accelerate the next phase and the next boss will spawn. If you fail to kill the boss within the timer, the next one will spawn and you will need to deal with both. Phase 1 is a large centaur-like creature named Gormak the Impaler. Gormak has 2 abilities and spawns 1 type of add. His abilities are Staggering Stomp, which deals damage to all enemies within 15 yards and interrupts spellcasting for 8 seconds. He also casts Impale. This is your tank swap mechanic. Impale inflicts a percentage of weapon damage to an enemy and causes it to bleed for damage per stack for 40 seconds. And finally, Rising Anger. This increases all damage dealt by 15% and is applied every time Gormak throws a snowbolt. The adds Gormak spawns are Snowballed Vassals. These are annoying little kobolds that latch on to random players and interrupt spellcasting. They have 3 abilities. Firebomb, which inflicts fire damage to all enemies within 8 yards of the target. Headcrack, which stuns the target for 2 seconds on a 30-second cooldown. And finally, Batter, which strikes an enemy for 75% of normal melee damage, interrupting spellcasting for 5 seconds. These are targetable and killable. They cannot be cleaved, but they can be cleaved off of. Ensure you're targeting them. Phase 2 consists of 2 separate giant Jormonger worms, Acid Maw and Dreadscale, but no additional adds. It is a debuff rotation similar to Stormcloud on Hodir in Ulduar and Polarity Shift on Thaddeus in Nax. Each worm has 6 abilities and switches between being mobile and stationary. Acid Maw will begin the fight stationary and have the following abilities. Paralytic Spray sprays acid at an enemy and nearby targets, dealing nature damage and applying a debilitating paralytic toxin. Acid Spit, which deals nature damage to an enemy. And Sweep, which inflicts physical damage to enemies within 15 yards and knocks them back. Dreadscale will begin the fight mobile and will have the following abilities while moving around the room. Burning Bite, which deals fire damage to an enemy and coats them with burning bile. Molten Spew deals fire damage every 0.25 seconds over 2.5 seconds to enemies in front of the caster. And Slime Pool, which inflicts nature damage to enemy targets within the poison clouds. This is spawned underneath Dreadscale while mobile and lasts 30 seconds. These are just like the clouds on Globulus in Nax. Periodically, the worms will burrow and swap places. Acid Maw becoming mobile and Dreadscale becoming stationary. Their abilities then change. Acid Maw while mobile will cast Paralytic Bite, which deals nature damage to an enemy and injects them with a paralytic toxin. Acidic Spew, which deals nature damage every 0.25 seconds over 2.5 seconds to enemies in front of the caster. And Slime Pool, just like before. Dreadscale, when he's stationary, will cast Burning Spray, which sprays fluid at an enemy and nearby targets, dealing fire damage and coating them with burning bile. Fire Spit, which deals fire damage to an enemy. And Sweep, just like Acid Maw. It's important to note that Paralytic Toxin and Burning Bile are debuffs that are placed on players throughout this phase. Paralytic Toxin can be removed by Burning Bile. If you get the toxin, you'll need to go to the person with the bile in order to remove the debuff from yourself. We'll go over this in a bit. Once both worms are dead, the third and final phase will begin, and Ice Howl, the massive Yeti, will spawn. He has 5 abilities and also no adds. The first ability is Arctic Breath, an icy breath that freezes targets in a cone in front of the caster, inflicting frost damage over 5 seconds. Ferocious Butt, which delivers a ferocious headbutt to an enemy, inflicting massive physical damage and stunning for 3 seconds. Massive Crash, Ice Howl will leap into the air and crash down with massive force, dealing physical damage to all enemies, stunning them and knocking them into the wall. Whirl, which whirls around, dealing physical damage to all enemies within 15 yards and knocking them back. Trample, which he'll run at an enemy and try to kill them. And finally, Frothing Rage. This increases physical damage and attack speed by 50% for 15 seconds. Now that we've gone over the abilities, let's talk strategy. Phase 1 is a pretty straightforward tank and spank. Keep your melee DPS close to the boss behind him and have them cleave down any snowballs that spawn on the melee DPS. You cannot cleave the kobolds directly, you must target them to cleave the boss. The tanks will want to taunt off of each other at 2 or 3 stacks of the Impale debuff. You can Hand of Protection one of the tanks once they're not tanking to remove the debuff, alleviating some pressure off of your healers if needed, as it will still tick on the non-tanking tank until it wears off. Caster DPS should stay spread out 10 yards and ensure they are swapping to the snowballs, especially if they get on a healer. All caster DPS need to swap as the kobolds will lock down whoever it has on them, and it will last through the phases, so ensure there are none up when transitioning to phase 2. In addition, if you get a kobold on you and you're in range, you should move into the melee so they can cleave it down. Phase 2. So in phase 2, you'll want to have your 2 tanks separated, picking up the worms and facing them away from the raid. This is where you'll want to Bloodlust and put all DPS on Acid Maw. Before they burrow the first time, the Dreadscale tank will be the only one with Burning Bile, which is needed to remove Paralytic Toxin. Any players with the Toxin will need to run to the tank of Dreadscale and take a tick of fire damage to remove the Toxin. You do not need to run in front of the worm. The range is 10 yards, so get just close enough to take a tick. Alternatively, you can use 3 tanks once the Burning Bile goes out, have your 3rd tank taunt Dreadscale, and the Bile tank run to remove the Toxin off any players. If they do not do this, they will slowly be unable to move and then die to the damage over time. Hunters should mark each worm so that when they burrow, the positioning can be seen. Caster DPS should spread out around the room so that Toxin doesn't go on multiple people. Once Acid Maw is dead, Dreadscale will enrage and deal 50% additional damage. Use tanking CDs here and externals like Pain Suppression, Hand of Sacrifice, Divine Protection, Shield Wall, etc. Any remaining toxins can be removed by the bile from Dreadscale. Melee should be aware of the sweep and poison clouds and ensure you don't get knocked back into the ranged DPS to spread more toxin and don't die to the clouds on the ground. Burning Bile will be very dangerous in the second part of this phase. Use Divine Guardian if needed for large group, especially melee. Once Stridmaw is dead, the final phase will begin. Phase 3 is also a fairly straightforward phase like Phase 1. Instead of it being a tank and spank, ensure your positioning is good here and you'll have a successful kill. Aside from the melee range knockback, Whirl, and his periodic tank stun, Arctic Breath, the main mechanics of this fight are his massive crash and ferocious butt/trample. Periodically throughout the fight, Ice Howl will jump into the middle of the room and knock everyone against the wall, stunning them for a few seconds. Keep your eye on Ice Howl. He will target someone and take a step back. The moment he takes a step back, the stun ends and everyone will need to move. Ice Howl will charge in whatever direction he is facing from his jump back. If you are in his path and get hit, you will instantly die and Ice Howl will gain his Frothing Rage buff, which can be dispelled by Tranquilizing Shot and Shiv. Ideally, no one should get hit by this. If no one gets hit by it, Ice Howl will hit the wall, get stunned, and take increased damage for a short time. Rinse and repeat until Ice Howl is dead, and congratulations, you've defeated the first boss of the Trial of the Grand Crusader. Now, let's just go over some normal mode pair downs. So number 1, there is no timer between phases. You will have until you kill each boss before the next one spawns. In Phase 1, Impale will not do nearly as much damage and the health of the snowballs will be dramatically reduced. The strategy remains the same, but just way less damage. Phase 2, similar to Heroic, the mechanics remain the same. This is still the most dangerous phase. Use Lust on Acid Maw, remove the toxin, and kill the worms. Phase 3, when Massive Crash happens, after the stun wears off, all raiders will obtain a speed buff that will make avoiding the ferocious butt substantially easier. And now let's just talk about some final tips. Tank tips. Ensure you're taunting off of each other and communicating effectively for Phase 1. Call out if you get a snowballed on you so people can assist and kill it. Assign specific tanks for Acid Maw and Dreadscale and stick to it. If you're 3 tanking, keep the communication lines open for the Bile tank to remove toxin from other raiders. And make sure you remove the Hand of Protection buff before the worms become active in Phase 2. DPS tips. Melee, watch out for clouds and don't get knocked back into clouds in Phase 2 or 3. And don't forget to kill snowballs. Range should always be spread out around the boss. 10 yards for Phase 1 and 2, and in a circle for Phase 3. Ranged, ensure you're killing those snowballs too. If the snowballs aren't going down fast enough, yell at your raid. This is the most important part of Phase 1. Snowballs will continually move. You should not move. Don't jitter, don't move, get into melee range, and just stand still until they're dead. Healer tips. Hand of Protection on the tank in the transition between Phase 1 and Phase 2 to remove impale damage and alleviate the tank damage at the start of Phase 2. Call out if you get a snowballed on you. Don't assume a tank can taunt it. They can't. It will stun lock you. Make sure people know to kill it. And then same as above, don't move once you get into melee. Don't jitter, don't move, just get into melee range and stop. That's all there is to it. Thanks so much for watching. As always, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to make more videos. See you next time.